Hey, welcome back to Alamo Wealth. Today we're just going to go over some jargon, some keywords that you might hear if you're just getting into real estate, or if you're maybe a future client that's trying to sell their real estate and you don't really know much about the industry and the terminology, and you maybe just don't want to trust your realtor, which is smart. Don't ever just trust someone, even if it's a friend or family. Not that they might do you wrong, it's just intentionally, just they don't always know what they don't know, and that could get you in trouble or create a little loss for you that was unnecessary. Let's start off with mortgage. This is the underlying note for your property, usually from the bank or the lender, that you're required to pay a monthly principal amount plus the interest. Note is essentially the amount that you've agreed to pay for the home carries a mortgage. That's the principal and the interest together. That's what you pay every month. PMI is the insurance platform. It's the security that the lender is going to carry, and it's a little bit more each month for you to pay out of pocket, because essentially you are not paying 20% down. You're paying less than 20%, and so there's a risk that the lender is taking for holding more of that debt. And so they're going to make you pay for it with what's called PMI, and that's private mortgage insurance. FHA versus VA versus conventional financing. Okay, FHA is it's a federal-backed program that usually for targeting first-time or underprivileged or low-income earners. VA is ex-military and servicemen, and then conventional usually is going to be your Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac loans that you go and get from every bank sells them. Everybody has these programs. That's your typical convention where you need to come with 20% down and all that. PITI, P-I-T-I, and I pity a fool who pays this. That's what I usually say. And what I mean by that is, if you're paying your own PITI, you're a fool. Unless you're well off. But if you're trying to get your finances straight, if you're watching this, you should not be paying your PITI. Somebody else should be paying your PITI. And what I mean by that is, you should be acquiring property that you are renting to someone else that will pay you a monthly rent due, and that monthly rent pays your PITI. That way it technically is an asset. If you're paying your PITI, it's a liability. Okay? So your PITI is your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. That's the four things that every property is going to need, period. Your principal and your interest go to your note holder, your lender. And your insurance is to protect the asset, which all lenders are going to require that. And then taxes, you just can't avoid those. Interest rate. Interest rate is pretty standard. If I lend you $10 at 10% interest rate per month, that means you owe me $1 extra every month. So you'll have to pay me $1. If it's interest only, you'll have to pay me that $1 every month until you pay me back the $10 in full. So if you carry it for 10 months, you owe me $10 in interest, and then you owe me the $10 I originally paid you or lent you. So the interest rate you need to be very careful for. Right now, 2020 with the election, right now you need to really keep your wits about you. If you need to buy real estate for yourself, find a great deal. Hold off until you find a great deal. Don't rush in just because the interest rates are low. You could be locking yourself into trouble because values are really high right now. So you need to be studying your market and playing the game correctly. Last thing too with the interest rate is your rate itself. So rates might jump up high as 8%. Right now they're like 3.25% standard rate, and that's at the beginning of 2020. So that's a really good rate, and it might even go down to 2.75% sometime this year, which is insane. So if that happens and you're in a position where your debt to income, your DTI, which is not on here, but we'll talk about that. DTI is your debt to income. Usually banks won't lend to you unless it's 45% or less your debt to income. So if you make $100,000 a year, your debt needs to be $45,000 per year of expenses on that debt. Your interest rate should never go above 8% on anything ever. And if it does, don't ever do it. Like even in flipping houses on hard money, just dig a little harder and try to find somebody that's going to get you 8% or less interest rate. And then we could talk about interest only and principal and interest, talking about amortization schedules. We could talk about that in a future date. Maybe we'll even do, when we do these videos, we'll do a word of the day, something like that. Broker versus realtor. In the most general terms, a realtor is the salesman that has the expertise and the license to sell real estate. Broker was a realtor, also has a realtor's license, but they have amount of time in real estate that where they have been able to get another type of license and certification so they can list properties, they can manage other realtors underneath of them. FMV versus ARV, okay. Fair market value versus after repair value, okay. Fair market value. So a lot of times what we'll see is when we go out there to talk to people about their properties, we'll tell them like, hey, right now your house is worth $86,000. It's what you'll get for the way that it is in this present condition. And even though it's worth $86,000, it'll probably take you, after cleaning it up a little, probably take you 3 or 4 months to sell it looking like it does. And that's just us being very fair, looking at the comps in the neighborhood and seeing how long the days on market that it took for them to sell, the DOM. We're going to then adjust it to how much we think the price per square foot on your house at current present condition is. And that's the FMV. So if you ever go and we tell you it's $86,000, but yet you go to your tax appraiser, and most likely it's going to say like $56,000 because typically taxes are appraised lower than what the actual value is, just because the way things balance out. Sometimes it's not always the case. I had a property where my values were more than I paid, and then you just need to go and dispute it the following year and talk about that so you can get that reimbursed back to you or offset on your next payout to the government. ARV is after I repair it. So if I give you the FMV of your property in current condition on today's market of $86,000, but then I know that I can turn around and sell it for $120,000, that's the ARV. And that is determinate upon the other comps in the neighborhood based upon how I would flip it. So maybe the new paint, new floors, granite countertops, updating the bathroom, all that stuff. I'll put 20 grand into your house, which then puts me at $106,000 value, and then I'll list it for 120 grand and I'll make a $10,000 profit or something. So that's where the ARV comes into place. And so we need to get these properties at 70% of the ARV minus the repairs. So if your house is worth 100 grand ARV, it's going to take 20 grand in repairs, then I'm going to offer you $50,000 because 70% minus 20,000 from 100 is 50, so that's half the price. So typically we are getting these houses for half the price. And so if you ever see these posts online like, oh, they're going to screw you, they're going to take you for half the price, there's a reason for it. We're not screwing anybody. If our services don't align with what you want, that's fine. I mean, we'll figure out a way to either get you through a realtor, list it, and hopefully that works for you. But for most times, we come in and get the properties that no realtor is even going to take because they know it's never going to sell because the roof is caving in or something. Or maybe there's an urgency factor. If there's urgency, we can come and close within 7 days, as opposed to putting it on the market and hoping someone buys it within a few months. But usually with the urgency, you need to be in and out. You need the money within a few weeks. That's typically what it is. So people like me can do that for you. Appraisal. So this is where you're going to get your house professionally appraised by somebody that's licensed and bonded and certified in this field. And they'll come in and typically through a lending program, they'll say, okay, we need to send an appraiser. They're $400 to $700 usually. And they'll do a detail analysis on what they feel your house is truly worth. That's using a lot of different techniques and comps and things like that. Now, they're not always right. In fact, most of the time, appraisers are pressured by lending companies to be more conservative than they should be, because then that allows the lending company to be safe. And you know, I understand why that happens. I really do. And maybe it's good for most people because that way we don't get screwed like the last time when the bubble popped and everything crashed because everyone was buying things like idiots and they didn't understand how this works. But it's not good for people like me when we're buying these exactly how we know it should be and where the numbers should go. And then an appraiser comes in and undermines us and it ruins our numbers. And now a lot of things have to change on our side because they decided to be extra conservative. So if you're an appraiser, if you know an appraiser, tell them to fight the lenders, fight the pressure, and comp the properties the best that they can. You know, just do things right. You know, you're not hurting anybody. You're not hurting your name. You're not hurting yourself. If somebody buys something right and you appraise it right and things still go wrong, that's nobody's fault. That's just life and things happen. So don't feel bad about that and don't let people pressure you into doing lowball numbers. Liens. Lien against your property is where somebody has put an encumbrance on your property. They've attached a ball and chain to your property to where you can't do anything with it. Like if you're trying to sell the property, you won't be able to do that until you pay off that lien. You'll have a landscaper or someone come by and maybe they didn't do the job they said. And so you were like mad and you paid them half the price instead of the full price. They get mad at you and they decide, you know what, I'm going to put a lien on their property. They can do that. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. What you can do is there's a couple options, and we can go into that further in a different video. But that's what a lien is. It's their ability to try to collect the debt from you by putting pressure on the asset that you carry. And title. Title is where all the magic happens. So if these are the guys that do all the research on your notes, your liens, your everything that they can possibly find on you and your property and what you owe and your debts and skeletons in the closet. That way, when there's a transition of the asset or the property from one lender to another, that it's clean and it's clear title. That means that the property is washed of all sins and it's good to go. Otherwise, it's going to get kicked back and title will let you know, hey, these are the things that need to be checked off before we can close on this. And then you just take care of it. So I always recommend going to title unless you have your own title crew that knows exactly how to scrub these properties and do the research. Also, I always recommend going to title because title has title insurance. And yeah, it's another $1,000 or so, but it's worth it because if anything comes up that's wrong, which has happened to me twice, $40,000 balance that was left on it that I didn't have to pay because I had title insurance. Had I didn't decline that title insurance, I would have had to pay that 40 grand. So I get title insurance every time. I take that back. I have not gotten it twice because I have two properties where I owned it for 2 years. And nothing came up, and then I refinanced it out of my name and put it in my business name. And so at that time I did not get title insurance because I had already had it before. Nothing ever came up. Sure, something still could come up because it was only 2 years, maybe 5 years from now something comes up, but that was a risk I was willing to take. So that's it, guys. I hope that you learned something and tune into the next one.